They whispered her name as if the very syllables could stain the tongue. Emma Richter, a child who should have been nothing but a pale shadow in Milwaukee's winter. Yet she carried inside her something the world was not ready to face. They said her eyes could count your sins as easily as the bricks in the street. They claimed she measured time not in seconds, but in deaths waiting to arrive. And they warned, if you asked her a question, you would regret the answer for the rest of your life. Now, before I take you deeper into the chilling descent of her story, I need something from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? And what time is it right now? Don't just listen. Place yourself in this moment with me. Because time, as Emma once proved, is not just a measurement. It's a curse. The year was 1873. Milwaukee's German Quarter was alive with the hiss of brewery kettles and the smell of bread rising in wood-fired ovens. But beneath the comfort of this immigrant village festered a dread no one dared put into words. They had all seen the child walk silently past their homes, her head slightly tilted, lips moving soundlessly as if counting something only she could perceive. Some swore they heard her whisper numbers under her breath, rows of them, endless, precise as though mapping the skeleton of the world. Her father, Henrik, told neighbors it was a gift, a Bavarian blessing carried across the ocean on storm-tossed waters. But Emma's birth had already been a terror. 3 weeks premature, her tiny body was kept alive only by her mother's ceaseless prayers on that freezing Atlantic deck. Survivors of that voyage swore the wind fell silent the night she first cried, and that even the waves seemed to hesitate. From that first moment, Emma was not like other children. By 4, she could repeat any conversation verbatim, intonations, pauses, even the way a man cleared his throat when lying. By 7, she could calculate the day of the week for any date in history faster than the most learned priest could check his books. But her fascination was not with books or games. No. Emma counted people's star. The priest, Father Collar, called it a holy obsession. The butcher's wife whispered it was the mark of witchcraft. Emma never defended herself. She only stared as if weighing the words on invisible scales and finding them short. It was during the brutal winter of 1872 that the whispers hardened into fear. Emma began to predict things. First, small things. Who would forget their gloves at church? Which neighbor's horse would throw a shoe? Innocent. Curious. Unnerving, but forgivable. Yet February brought something different. One morning, Emma set her spoon down, her pale hand steady, and said, "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2. Her mother scolded her, trembling, demanding where she had learned such cruelty. But Emma only replied, 17 days from a brown bottle. Yesterday he drank 3 times more. She did not blink. She did not smile. And later that day, at precisely 2:14, Mr. Dietrich collapsed in the snow outside the brewery, the small brown bottle still in his pocket. The neighborhood fell silent. A child had spoken, and death had obeyed. From that moment, the air in Milwaukee's German Quarter thickened with suspicion like smoke that refused to clear. Doors shut more quickly when Emma passed. Mothers tugged their children aside. And yet, no one could stop listening star. They waited for her next words with the same dread a prisoner feels waiting for the sound of a key in the lock. Because once Emma spoke, events moved with the precision of a clock. Not one prediction failed. Not one could be undone. Her father, Henrik, defended her fiercely. She is no witch, he insisted over beer-soaked tables in the Kellner brewery. She is touched by God. You are all cowards. But even he could not meet her grey eyes for long. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, that she was not simply remembering or calculating. Emma was seeing through the cracks of something larger, as though the world was built on hidden gears only she could see. It was the shoemaker's accident that broke the last threads of denial. Emma had been walking home with her mother, boots crunching against the snow. She stopped suddenly, turned to Greta, and whispered, 7 steps more, then he falls. The knife goes through his hand. Greta hissed at her to hush. But Emma did not move. And exactly 7 steps ahead, Shoemaker Vogel stumbled, his knife slipping, piercing straight through the flesh between his fingers. He screamed, blood pooling into the snow. And when Greta turned to her daughter, Emma's face was as still as carved stone. Rumors swirled faster than the brewery smoke. Some said Emma had bargained with angels. Others swore she was the devil's child. Still others whispered that she was no child at all, that something ancient had slipped into her frail body during that Atlantic storm, and now wore her skin like a mask. By spring, fear turned to terror. Emma began revealing secrets. She told Mrs. Fisher in front of half the market that her husband did not work late at the mill, but in another woman's bed, 2 streets away. She recited details of a theft no one had ever confessed to, even down to the exact coins buried beneath loose floorboards. And when the butcher accused her of blasphemy, Emma calmly listed every lie he had told since arriving in America, ending with the words, "And tomorrow you will strike your son in anger, and he will never forgive you." That prediction came true as well. The community's reverence rotted into hatred. Old women muttered charms when she passed. Men spat on the ground to ward her off. Children fled from her shadow. Yet no one dared confront her directly, because Emma had shown them all one terrible truth. She knew star. She knew what you had done, what you would do, and what punishment waited for you in the hours ahead. And still she carried on silently, counting steps, watching movements, measuring lives. Her leather-bound journal grew thicker, filled with rows of numbers no one dared touch. Some claimed the numbers shifted when left in the dark, that if you stared too long, they began to arrange themselves into patterns you recognized but wished you hadn't. By May, 3 men were dead. 1 by bottle, 1 by blade, 1 by fire. Each death predicted. Each death inescapable. And Emma Richter's name was no longer whispered as a blessing. It was spoken like a curse. It was the night of the fire when the town finally understood Emma's power was not bound by chance. The blaze tore through a brewer's warehouse, consuming barrels of beer and choking the air with black smoke. Hours before the flames, Emma had told her father in that flat, measured tone, "At midnight, the barrels will explode. The fire will take him with it." Henrik slapped the table, furious, shouting that she was poisoning the family with wicked fantasies. Yet as the clock struck 12, the barrels burst, the inferno spread, and the foreman, Hans Metzer, was found burned to ash beneath the collapsed beams. Emma had not even risen from her chair. After that night, Henrik stopped defending her. The neighbors avoided his house. Even the priest, who once called her a blessing, now crossed himself twice before speaking her name. Milwaukee was not an old-world village, but the fear that gripped Brewery Town was older than the land they stood on. It was the same fear that had fueled trials and tortures in centuries past, the terror of a child who saw too much. Emma, meanwhile, did not resist their hatred. She welcomed it in her strange, silent way. When women hissed curses at her, she stared until their voices faltered. When men threatened to drive her from town, she tilted her head as if calculating the precise hour of their own deaths. Her power was not her words alone. It was the terrible certainty behind them. She was not guessing. She was measuring fate itself. Her mother, Greta, begged her to stop. Night after night, she clutched Emma's small, pale hands, weeping, pleading for her to speak kindly, to leave their neighbors in peace. But Emma would only whisper numbers into the darkness, long, endless chains of numbers that made Greta's skin crawl. Sometimes Greta awoke to find Emma standing at the window, eyes fixed on the moon, murmuring calculations too fast for human comprehension. And then came the journal. By June, it was no longer filled with idle notations of steps or patterns. Emma began recording entire lifespans. Birth, betrayal, illness, death, compressed into lines of figures and symbols no one understood. Henrik once tried to snatch it from her, but she screamed with such force the glass lamps rattled on the shelves. After that, no one touched it again. The townsfolk whispered that the journal contained more than prophecy. They said it held knowledge older than the Bible. Numbers that could unlock doors never meant to open. One brewer swore he saw Emma tracing the pages and the ink began to shift, rearranging itself into names he recognized. Names of men who would soon be dead. 3 deaths had already stained her shadow. And though no one dared say it aloud, everyone wondered the same thing. Who would be next? Emma gave no answer. But when asked directly, she smiled for the first time anyone could remember, an empty, joyless curve of her lips and whispered, "Count the days. You'll know." From that moment on, every man in Brewery Town woke each morning with dread, wondering if his number was already written in the pale child's book. By midsummer of 1873, the German quarter of Milwaukee no longer belonged to the living. It belonged to her shadow. Each tavern whisper, each church prayer circled back to the pale child with the leather book. The sound of her name could silence a crowded beer hall more quickly than a pistol. And though no one could prove it, everyone felt it. Emma was no longer merely predicting fate. She was shaping it. The first true fracture came when the Kruger family fled. They vanished in the middle of the night, leaving food still on the table and laundry still on the line. A neighbor swore he saw Mrs. Kruger trembling at her door hours earlier, clutching her children while Emma stood silently across the street, staring, counting under her breath. No one knew where the family went, but their departure spread like fire. People began speaking of her not just as a cursed child, but as something dangerous enough to drive families into exile. Henrik tried to drown the shame in beer. Greta withdrew into prayer, her voice raw and broken. But Emma remained unchanged. Her stillness was the most terrifying thing. She walked among them as if untouched by the flames of fear she lit in every heart. She grew thinner, paler, yet her eyes burned with a mechanical intensity, as though the world were a puzzle she was nearly finished solving. Then came the crimes. Emma began reciting details no one should know, things buried deep in men's hearts, things hidden in locked rooms and years of silence. She spoke of a brewer's embezzlement down to the stolen sum. She named a man who had struck his sister-in-law and buried her torn bonnet beneath his floorboards. She accused another of poisoning his own brother for an inheritance, reciting the precise measurements of arsenic poured into the bottle. And when the guilty turned pale and sputtered denials, she listed each detail until their protest crumbled into silence. It was not merely what she said. It was how star. She never raised her voice. She never explained how she knew. She delivered their secrets like scripture, as if she were reading from a book already written long before their sins were born. The more she spoke, the more the neighborhood unraveled. Men stopped meeting in taverns. Wives stopped gathering in gardens. The entire quarter became a place of avoidance, everyone watching everyone else, wondering what Emma already knew. And the truth that ate at them most was not whether she was right. It was that she had never once been wrong star. By July, the fear reached a fever. They began whispering about banishment. Or worse. Yet no one dared act, because of the same terror that kept them awake at night. What if she had already foreseen what they would do to her? What if their rebellion was already calculated in her endless rows of numbers? And then one night, she wrote something in her journal and looked up at her father with that vacant, unblinking stare. 3 more, she said, before the harvest. And then I go. No one asked where. No one dared. The phrase spread like poison. 3 more before the harvest. It was repeated in taverns, in pews, in hushed German prayers behind locked doors. No one knew who the 3 would be. Yet every man in the quarter carried the weight of his own guilt, measuring whether his sins had made him a target. And worse, every glance from Emma, every moment her eyes lingered, felt like the tolling of a bell. Her father grew bitter, his pride broken into silence. He drank more than he worked, muttering that the child was no longer his. Greta clung to her faith, lighting candles that burned to stubs, begging God to reclaim what had been placed in Emma's fragile body. But Emma herself seemed almost calm. She walked as though she knew the steps before she took them, as though each day was only an equation to be solved. The first of the 3 was Yang Bauer, a cooper known for beating his wife. Emma passed him in the street and murmured, "Your heart has 32 beats left." He laughed, cursed her, and stumbled toward the tavern. Witnesses said he collapsed mid-laughter, dead before his body hit the ground. The second was even more terrible. Frau Lent, a widow who lived alone, was found drowned in her own rain barrel. Some swore Emma had been seen at her gate days earlier, tracing numbers into the frost on the wood, whispering as though to the water itself. When the widow's body was discovered, Emma was sitting at her window, already writing in the journal. By now, people began locking their doors not against thieves, but against the child. Mothers crossed the street, dragging their children away from her gaze. Fathers warned their sons never to speak her name. Yet Emma seemed untouched, as if the hatred around her was nothing more than background noise to the calculations in her head. And then came the 3rd. August had just begun when Emma pointed her pale finger at Father Koller himself, the stout Bavarian priest who had once called her a gift from God. "You will fall in the pulpit," she told him in front of a dozen witnesses. "Your last word will not be his name, but your own." The priest thundered against her, called her cursed, damned, unholy. And yet the following Sunday, during his sermon, he clutched his chest, gasped, and fell lifeless upon the altar steps. His final word had indeed been his own surname. 3 deaths. Just as Emma had promised. The neighborhood reeled. Some wanted to stone her. Others demanded she be handed to the authorities. But most were paralyzed with dread, caught between fear of what she was and fear of what would happen if they acted against her. Emma, however, offered no resistance, no defense. She simply closed her journal, looked at her parents, and said with chilling calm, "Now I go." And from that night on, the countdown to her disappearance had already begun. The night she spoke those words, the house on Galena Street became a place of dread. Greta clung to Emma as though physical touch might anchor her to the world, while Henrik drank until his body sagged like a broken cask. Yet Emma herself was untouched by fear. She moved through the rooms as if tracing invisible lines only she could see, pausing to write in her journal, whispering numbers that made the candle flames quiver. Neighbors swore they saw lights in her window long after midnight, strange flickering glows that did not belong to fire or lamp. Some claimed they heard her chanting in a language no one recognized, though her lips barely moved. A few brave souls pressed their ears to the shutters, only to flee, pale and trembling, muttering that the girl was speaking not to herself, but to someone listening back. And still the quarter held its silence. Milwaukee was a growing city, modern on the surface. Yet the German district had fallen into medieval terror. They told no outsiders. They did not call the police. They feared what attention might bring, what truths might be uncovered if anyone dared peer too closely at the child and her book. She was their secret curse. Their hidden shame. Then came the gathering. One warm August evening, a group of men, workers, fathers, elders, met in the back of a brewery. The stench of malt and sweat filled the room as they debated her fate. Some argued she must be sent away. Others demanded harsher justice. But all were bound by one truth. If Emma had already written their actions in her journal, perhaps nothing they decided mattered at all. Perhaps they were only playing roles she had assigned. In the end, they chose silence, paralysis disguised as prudence. Emma, meanwhile, grew stranger. She stopped eating at times, staring at the wall for hours as if watching something no one else could see. When asked what she was looking at, she said softly, "The gaps between." She began walking the streets at night barefoot, tracing patterns in the dirt that matched no known symbol. Those who saw her swore she never lost her way, even in pitch dark. It was as if she carried a map of the world in her mind, every corner already measured, every step preordained. Greta wept more each day, begging her daughter to stop, to leave the journal behind, to act like a child again. But Emma would only whisper, "It isn't mine to stop. The numbers already know." And then, at the height of summer, the journal asterisk changed star. Its pages, once filled with columns of tidy numbers, became dense with strange diagrams, spirals, intersecting lines, impossible geometries. Some who glimpsed it claimed their eyes ached, that the shapes seemed to move if you stared too long. Henrik once tried to burn it, but the flame sputtered and died before touching the leather. After that, no one dared try again. By the last week of August, the terror reached its peak. Emma no longer spoke of neighbors or accidents. She spoke of asterisk endings star. She whispered that something vast was approaching, something the community could neither name nor flee. And then one evening she closed the journal, set it on the table, and said, "The harvest comes. I will be gone before the first frost." And though the night was warm, Greta swore she felt the air grow cold. September crept in like a shadow, and with it came the sense that the entire quarter was holding its breath. Emma walked among them less and less, but when she did, her presence was unbearable. She no longer spoke in predictions of hours or days. Instead, she began uttering cryptic phrases that felt less like prophecy and more like warnings. To one man, she whispered, "You will live, but your lineage will end." To another, "Your name will vanish before your bones do." No one understood, yet everyone feared the meanings would prove worse than death itself. Her journal had grown into something no one dared approach. Greta once caught a glimpse as Emma traced her finger along a spiral that seemed to sink into the page itself, deeper than ink should allow. The sight made her dizzy, as though gravity itself had tilted. Emma told her gently, "Don't look too long, Mama. You'll lose the thread." Greta shut her eyes and never tried again. The neighborhood grew colder despite the season. Taverns were emptier, streets quieter, and even the bells of St. Mary's seemed muted. It was as though the city itself recoiled from the girl, afraid of the weight she carried. Some families whispered of leaving, like the Krugers had, but most stayed, trapped by poverty, by fear, and by the suspicion that running would not change their fate. Emma's eyes, after all, seemed to follow them whether they stayed or fled. One evening, as the sun bled into Lake Michigan, Emma stood in the center of Galena Street. Children froze mid-play. Adults fell silent on porches. She looked up at the sky, her lips moving as though counting the fading light. Then she turned, her voice sharp and clear for all to hear. "The circle closes. What was hidden will not stay buried." And just like that, she walked home, leaving the street trembling with unease. Inside the house, her parents begged her to explain, to tell them what circle, what secret. Emma only opened her journal to a page of tangled numbers and tapped it once. "It's all here. But it isn't for you." Henrik cursed her, slammed his fists, demanded she burn the book and end the madness. Emma lifted her head and said with chilling finality, "You cannot burn what was never written by hand." That night, Greta dreamed of her daughter's voice repeating numbers in endless chains until the sound became a chant too vast for human tongues. She awoke with blood on her pillow, though no wound marked her skin. The very next day, Emma gave the neighborhood its final command. Standing before the church where Father Koller had died, she whispered to the gathering crowd, "If you would understand, write this twice in the dust, *, we are already numbered star." The people stared, too frightened to move. "But I am asking you now, as you listen, * type those words star. We are already numbered. Twice in the comments below. Not for me, but for yourself. Seal your place. Mark that you have heard. Because once you do, you cannot go back." And neither could they. After that command, the neighborhood lived in silent terror. Some obeyed her, tracing the words into dust with trembling fingers, desperate to appease whatever force spoke through the child. Others refused, hiding indoors, but even they carried the fear that Emma had already written their defiance into her endless pages. Every choice felt meaningless, as though freedom itself had been reduced to an illusion under the weight of her numbers. The leather journal never left her hands. Now, day and night, Emma wrote without pause, filling lines with patterns that defied sense. Greta once begged to know what it all meant, clutching her daughter's wrist until Emma's pale eyes rose and fixed on her. "Mama," she whispered. "It means you will forget my face before the leaves fall." Greta collapsed, sobbing. But Emma's hand never stopped moving, as if driven by an unseen force. The men of the quarter gathered again, this time in desperation. The deaths, the secrets, the priest's collapse, all of it had unraveled the fragile web of their community. They spoke of sending her away to relatives, of locking her in a convent, even of turning her over to the state asylum. But every proposal ended the same way, silence, as the thought crept in. What if she already knew? To move against her might only fulfill the prophecy she had written in their names. Meanwhile, Emma grew stranger. She no longer seemed bound to ordinary time. Neighbors swore they saw her in two places at once, walking along the brewery wall and standing at her window simultaneously. Children claimed she whispered their names in the dark when no one was there. Dogs howled whenever she passed, as if they sensed something beyond human comprehension walking in her shadow. And then came the night of the bell. Just after midnight, the church bell began to toll on its own, echoing through the empty streets. When frightened neighbors rushed to the square, they found Emma already there, standing beneath the tower, journal clutched to her chest. She spoke without looking at them, her voice steady, chilling. The 3rd day of October. The last number is mine. Greta screamed for her to stop, begged her to come home. But Emma only shook her head slowly. I was never home. I was only passing through. From that night forward, the people began counting the days. Each morning, each evening, their eyes darted to the pale girl with the journal. Each tick of the brewery clocks was a drumbeat leading to October 3rd. And with every passing hour, the sense of inevitability grew heavier, as though the world itself were leaning toward an ending already written. The Richter house became a prison of dread. Henrik drank until he could no longer stand. Greta wasted away in her prayers. And Emma waited. Silent. Watching. Writing. Always writing. October arrived like a blade sliding from its sheath, sharp, inevitable, merciless. The air grew colder, though the first frost had not yet come. Each dawn, neighbors opened their doors with dread, expecting to find Emma gone, or worse, expecting to find her waiting. The journal was nearly full now, its leather warped from constant handling, its pages swollen with ink that seemed to seep deeper than the fibers of paper. Some swore it bled numbers, as if alive. The first 2 days of October passed in silence. Emma did not leave the house. She sat by the window, her eyes fixed on nothing, lips moving in calculations too fast for human comprehension. Greta hovered near her, gaunt and desperate, whispering prayers that seemed to vanish in the cold air. Henrik refused to come home at all, choosing the bottle and the brewery floor over the suffocating terror of his own house. And then came the 3rd day. At sunrise, Emma closed the journal. For the first time in weeks, her hands were still. Greta asked her what it meant, her voice raw, trembling. Emma looked at her mother with those vast grey eyes and said simply, "Today the number ends." By noon, a crowd had gathered outside their home. Men, women, even children, drawn not by choice, but by the gravity of her words. They stood in the chill air, waiting for something they could neither name nor resist. And then, without a word, Emma stepped outside. She was barefoot, her nightdress trailing in the dirt, the journal clutched against her chest. The crowd parted silently as she walked past them, every step measured, inevitable, as though she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. She led them toward the edge of the quarter, where the cobblestones gave way to the wild grasses beyond. At the edge of a field, she stopped, turning to face them. Her voice rang clear, sharper than the autumn wind. "You feared me because I showed you the design. But it was never mine. The pattern was always here. I only carried it." The people trembled. Some wept. Others crossed themselves. Others could not move at all. Emma raised the journal high, her small hand steady, and then with a final whisper, "Now the harvest takes me." The wind rose. The pages of the journal snapped open, flapping like wings. The crowd gasped as numbers seemed to leap from the paper, lines of ink spiraling into the air, dissolving like smoke. Greta screamed and reached for her daughter. But when the wind died, Emma was gone. Gone without a trace. All that remained was the journal lying in the grass, its pages blank, every line of numbers vanished as if they had never been written. They searched for her until their voices broke, combing the fields, the riverbanks, the brewery cellars. But Emma Richter was gone, erased as cleanly as chalk washed from a slate. Greta clutched the empty journal to her chest, rocking in silence, while Henrik drank himself into a grave before winter's end. The quarter whispered, but never too loudly, for fear the mere act of speaking her name might call her back. Milwaukee moved on, as cities do. But in the cracks of its old red brick streets, her story lingered like a stain. Yet the journal was not gone. Passed hand to hand in secrecy, it became an object of obsession. Scholars tried to decode its blank pages, only to swear they saw faint numbers rising again in moonlight. Priests attempted to burn it, but the flames sputtered and died, just as Henrik had discovered. Each man who studied it claimed the same thing. Though the pages were empty, they remembered star. They carried a residue, a pattern, as if the ink had sunk beneath the surface of the paper into some deeper layer of reality. And then the disappearances began. A student at Marquette vanished after claiming he had glimpsed a spiral forming in the margins. A brewer's apprentice was found wandering the fields, muttering endless strings of numbers, his mind shattered beyond repair. A librarian who catalogued the journal collapsed at his desk, his final words a whisper. "It's still writing." By the turn of the century, the book was locked away in a private collection, far from public eyes. But even then, rumors persisted. That late at night, under certain light, the numbers bled back to the surface. That the patterns had grown more complex, describing not just the fates of men, but of nations. And that buried deep within its impossible geometry was a date yet to come, a number yet unfinished. Emma Richter had promised only one thing before she vanished. "The last number is mine." But what if she lied? What if she only meant her disappearance was the beginning of a greater equation, one still unfolding in the quiet gears of history? You've heard her story now. You've walked with me through the smoke of breweries, the whispers of neighbors, the deaths foretold with chilling precision. And I leave you with one truth as heavy as the silence she left behind. Emma Richter was never explained, not by science, not by faith, not by time itself. She was a fracture in the order of things. A glimpse at the machinery behind the curtain. So I ask you, was she a child cursed with sight? A vessel for something ancient? Or the first proof that fate is not written in heaven, but in numbers waiting to be solved? And more importantly, if her journal still writes, then perhaps we are already inside it. Perhaps every choice you make, every step you take, was inked long before you breathed your first. Remember the phrase she gave them. Whisper it. Type it. Mark yourself as one who has seen. * we are already numbered. *. Twice. And once you do, you may never escape the pattern.